Sophie's story. It had been a long, satisfying afternoon. They had heard from a number of speakers on a number of topics. Close to 2,000 people listened, lunched, and listened some more at this year's Bible conference. And as attention spans traditionally shortened, this year's event host introduced the keynote speaker. Unknown to most of the attendees, but clearly someone the host was very excited about, Sophie took the mic to polite applause. "Picture with me, please," she began, "Jesus, standing right in front of you right now. He has one question to ask, and it's this: what are you believing me for?" The crowd fidgeted some in their seats, as what seemed to be such a simple question grew into a more and more difficult matter for most to answer. What was that one most important thing that they'd been trusting God for, that they'd have on the tip of their tongue if Jesus actually did ask? Most were embarrassed to come up blank. Oh, it was easy for some. They'd been asking for a particular healing or salvation for so long that it had become reflex. But even they were challenged by how actively they'd been believing lately. When requests are reduced to reflex, they tend to lack faith. And Sophie seemed to know just how important it is, not just for us to believe, but for us to be believing. So now that she had shaken up everyone's mind in a kind of, "I'm glad Jesus didn't come back before I heard that" sort of way, Sophie started her story. She told of a young girl's confusion, of heartbreak, of frustration, growing up not being able to communicate hardly anything, not because she was shy, but because she was physically or mentally unable to speak. So many tears, occasional breakthroughs, then more tears. Oh, her parents loved her. She knew that for sure. It was almost like in the Bible when God told Abraham that he would be a dad at 90, and then God waited 10 years to give them Isaac. Can't you just picture them for the first year, decorating the nursery, planning a gender reveal party? But after a few years, then 5, then 7, then 9 years after the promise, how hard was it to hang on? 90 was improbable, but 100? But they hang in there, trusting God for the very specific promise. Sophie went on, adding story after story, from Adam to Jacob to Joseph to Joel, where God made a promise and then waited, like he did with her parents. See, this wasn't so much Sophie's story. It was more a story about faith. Not the white knuckle holding on through a hurricane faith, although there has been some pretty impressive wind. More like a fun, playful, seeing God do more and more toward what he promised anticipation, where the outcome is never in doubt, but his timing may be a secret. Then came the miracle, the complete restoration, the biggest healing Sophie had ever seen, and she had a ringside seat. Her mind was opened, her mouth was opened. She not only could communicate, but she had wisdom and understanding. The insights and advice that she was giving people promoted her to the status of a coveted speaker almost overnight. And she took zero credit. She had watched her life stay on hold till God's timing was ready, and then amazing things happened. She watched her parents weather all the waves of the storm, but when God's timing was right, miracles happened. That was her message. Keep believing. Now you know what God did in my life. Are you ready to turn everything over to him and see what he can do in yours? The speaker finished her remarks as the listeners erupted into the first standing ovation that any speaker at that Bible conference had ever received. In an atmosphere that could only be described as tingling, every person there seemed to be nervously transitioning from, "This is too good to be true," to, "It makes perfect sense that this would be true." And the relief and the new freedom to simply believe God poured over them, made them want to laugh and cry at the same time. As the applause continued, the host came up to the front and thanked Sophie for her moving words. But the number of hands in the air anxiously waving to ask questions showed that this evening was not over. She beckoned Sophie back up front to more wild applause and then opened the floor for questions. Oh my," the first woman gasped kind of breathlessly and tried to compose herself enough to ask her question. "Thank you so much for telling your story," she began. "The difference between what you say you were like and what we see now is amazing. So amazing that I wonder if you might be exaggerating what you were like before, especially your account from when you were about 10, when that little girl came over to play with you, but she was so startled and afraid of the way you looked and acted that she just kept screaming. Are you sure you weren't stretching things a bit, just to make the contrast a little more dramatic?" Sophie chuckled, and then with a warm smile, she invited the host back up to join her. Accepting the mic, the host admitted, "Actually, that was me." She was obviously a bit embarrassed, but continued, "I'm not proud of it, but the first time we met, I freaked out. Our moms were friends, so I came along for a play date one time, but I'd never seen anybody act like that. She was older than me, but she could hardly even talk. She just made noises, and the way she shook her arms and swung her head and just scared me. I just wanted out." Then, a couple of years ago, a friend was telling me of how this really special speaker had given her so much hope in raising her children. She told me I just had to hear her. But when she told me her name, I was like, "You're kidding me right now. That's impossible," I thought. Must be somebody else with the same name. But when I saw the video online, I knew it was her. Now, my friend didn't tell me about her because she knew I'd need a speaker at a Bible conference someday. No, she told me because she knew how overwhelmed I was as a wife and a mom. I was barely thinking about God at all. And then I heard Sophie's story, and I knew it wasn't a coincidence that we had met before. I had been chosen by God to tell people what she was like before He healed her. Otherwise, like you said, who could really believe that such a change could be true? Just think of how difficult it was for Sophie's mom and dad to keep believing, keep trusting God to heal their precious daughter. How difficult it was for Sophie to have so many thoughts that she couldn't understand, let alone express. How this holding pattern of love and confusion continued for years, till God said the time was finally right for the miracle He had planned all along. So as embarrassed as I am to have been that rude little girl, I'm even more proud to stand before you now as an eyewitness to the power of the living God.